Coming to a point I mentioned already, it is the reduction of post-release mortality, a very important point. As I told earlier, that many of the drug users relapse to their opioid habit once they are released. This is associated with a high risk of overdose, and the factors contributing to an increased risk of acute death upon release in people with opioid use disorder, I would say, on the first hand, it's physiologically a desensitization to opioids, of course, due to the often difficult access to opioids in prison. And a fatal overdose is happening if pre-incarceration dose is consumed immediately at liberty. We carried out a study called My First 48 Hours Out, also issued by the European Commission just recently. And we found out very important relapses in the first 48 hours once people are released from prison. Also behaviorally, some main issues. The acute injection increases drug bioavailability and respiratory effects. So, of course, it's leading to a suppression of the breath. And it's concurrent, of course, with alcohol and benzodiazepines, with tranquilizer foremost, and it exacerbates suppression of respiratory drive. So, of course, this needs to be kept in mind. And we developed out of this project, My First 48 Hours Out, we developed some recommendations for drug users, but also for drug services, how to carry on. So, and it's concurrent with cocaine, especially the induction of cardiovascular arrhythmias. Drug-related deaths after release appear, especially in the first weeks after release. The excess mortality is increasing substantially. European studies have found out an excess on mortality risks, like in England and Wales. In the first week, the mortality rate among males, M, is 29-fold higher than a comparable population, and even worse, almost more than double the figure for females, is that females are especially vulnerable for an overdose and drug-related mortality in the first week after release. Also, studies in Denmark, France, and Ireland, they support this essential results. In Denmark, males and females were put together. The risk is 60 times higher than in a comparable population in freedom. In France, in the first year, males 15 to 34 years old, males do have a risk of 24 times higher than in the comparable population in freedom. And in other studies, we have even 274 times higher rate of vulnerability to post-related mortality. So, a very important study has been carried out by Michael Farrell and John Marston, published in Addiction recently, and they were measuring the acute risk of drug-related death among newly released prisoners in England and Wales. And you see here the data in a chart, blue for males, and especially when you go up to 1 week or up to 2 weeks, you see here in the dark blue people released from prisons, and the lighter color, that means that drug-related death and other causes. Other deaths and other causes of death, sorry. And you see here, this is extraordinarily high, and it's completely overrepresented. And so the post-mortality risks could be identified substantially, and every drug worker, every drug service needs to know, and also the drug user, of course, that he is endangered immediately when he is released from prison. Again, John Marston and Michael Forel, together with other colleagues, did a huge study on the question, does exposure to opioid substitution treatment in prison reduces the risk of death after release? So which role does opioid substitution treatment play? And they did a national prospective observational study in England with very important results. So their study population has been divided in a group who was OST exposed, some 8,600 releases, and the other group was not exposed to OST, and that makes up a number of 6,496. Altogether, 15,141 prison releases and 12,260 people opioid dependent. And you see here very clearly that they concluded that those who have been in an opioid substitution treatment while in prison with oral methadone or oral buprenorphine is a highly effective prison-based OST is a highly effective means of reducing the risk of death. And they found out a 75% reduction among people in the first 4 weeks after release from prison. And the protective effect observed for OST in this study was independent of behavioral confounders or admission to community treatment. When I look at OST in prisons in Germany, we see that this treatment is offered and conducted often unequal and is often insufficient. Hard to see, but you see here on the left side in the column the 16 Länder from Germany, like Bremen in the beginning and North Rhine-Westphalia. And you see here light and shadow in the countries. So the spread and coverage rate of OST in prisons is very diverse. Take out North Rhine-Westphalia, the second state in the second line. In 2018, there were 16,000 prisoners in general, and 3,600 were on substitution treatment. Sorry, 2,000 people, the last column, were in substitution treatment. 3,600 was the approximate number of opioid-dependent people in general. So they had a coverage rate of 56%. Outside in the community, I have to say that Germany has a coverage rate of approximately 50%. So they were quite in line with the rate of the outside situation. But you see here other Länder like Hesse, they have a coverage rate of 31%. 31% of those who are theoretically in need of opioid substitution treatment because they were opioid injectors or opioid consumers before imprisonment, did really receive this treatment, 31% in Hessen, and in Saarland, it's near to the French border, 27%. And you see here Baden-Württemberg around Stuttgart and other cities, 16%. So there's much to do in order to scale up the rate of the coverage rate in German prisons.